Hi, it's Mark from Mark of the Cyberbeast. Today, we're going to have a discussion on something you probably didn't realize. Now, you know I've owned pickup trucks for 35 years, but there's something I've done a lot longer than that, and that's IT and computers. I was actually 14 years old when I wrote my first program in Pascal and BASIC. There were two languages I programmed in and sold it. I made $100. I couldn't believe it. I made $100 writing a piece of software at age 14, okay? So I've been around computers for 40 years, actually over 40 years, from the Commodore 64 on up through today. So that's how I kind of had my whole career, was in healthcare and HIT, healthcare information technology. So what we're going to talk about today is Steve Jobs and his influence on Tesla. Many of you may not realize just how much of an impact the whole concept of how Steve went about things, Mr. Jobs, with designs and how things looked, because he believed technology should be logical, but should also be an art form. And many people look at these Tesla vehicles, from the first Roadster straight on up through the refreshed 3 and Y and the Cybertruck, as works of art. And we know from the interior, especially as such. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through a list of things that Steve Jobs was really at the core of designing, and go over where that impact kind of parlayed into Tesla. So way back, okay, Apple had the 2E, the 2C, etc., and they were, like most machines at that time, a separate computer and a monochrome monitor. But what happened is, after a couple years of that, he started going to a different direction with a Macintosh, okay? And he made an all-in-one, it was still monochrome, but it was an all-in-one computer monitor, and he implemented a mouse. Now, what he did with his mouse was a little bit different. He started off with a one-button mouse, while, obviously the IBM went to 2 buttons, and eventually the IBMs had 2 buttons and a scroll wheel, right? And if you're a gamer, you know you've got 2 buttons, a scroll wheel, and a couple other buttons on there. Well, there's also a history of Apple with their mouse, and mice, I should say, is they went from that one button, it looked kind of clunky with just a button on it, and then it became more of the whole thing was a button, and then they went wireless and made it like an art form. That Apple mouse today looks very high tech. It really, if you took that mouse today from Apple, right, and brought it back 30 years and put it into a Star Trek movie, it would fit in. Right? It's that futuristic feel and look, right? Naturally in your hand, and the whole thing is one button. And if you look at, also since the Macintosh, they have been really all integrated with the computer and the monitor as one. Whereas the PCs really didn't have that. Now you have some companies who started going that way. But for the most part, you have computers which were tower monitors. Think back to the 90s. If you guys had PCs back then, a 486 or a 386, usually there's a turbo button on the unit. And you can press that, and you can go from a DX33 to a DX266, right? Or a 40 to an 80, if you remember those chips. So the IBM PCs didn't have the aesthetic. These are these square boxes, the floppy drive, the CD-ROM, you had the turbo button, you had the power button. They were beige, and they were just bland. They just were. But what did Apple do? They made things look pretty with those Macs they had. Then they had the iMacs, the colored ones, right? And they really tried to make these things an art form, and they did. And Steve Jobs was that was his whole thing. Before Mark Zuckerberg famously had the blue t-shirt and jeans, it was Steve Jobs with the black turtlenecks and jeans, okay? He didn't want to have to think about what to wear. He just grabbed right from the closet where he had a bunch of his turtlenecks, and just grabbed one, put it on with his jeans, okay? But he truly believed in the art form. Now let's take a look at something that really evolved over a few years, which was an iPod, not an iPad, an iPod, right? And the first ones, okay, they were square and they had that round circle on it. And that circle had, the fast forward, rewind in the middle. You had a stop play, and the up and down also did different things. And you had the screen, but it was very, very different, right? Because back then that was like the first of its kind. Before that, you had the MP3 and CD players, which had buttons everywhere. And then as that iPod evolved, it got to the point where there was just one button on it, okay? Very, very different. And then you had different manufacturers in the PC world making their own MP3 players, but they had buttons everywhere. They just weren't taking the cue from Apple. Now, before I go any further into the next thing I'm going to talk about, which is the iPhones and iPads, as much as I love Steve Jobs, think he's just a brilliant mind, respect him, he's one of the, goes on Mount Rushmore, right? With Elon, Jobs, and a few others. I don't want to put Bill Gates up there. But I'm not an Apple fan. I've never liked Apple products. I had an iPhone 4 once. Never do it again. I don't like iPhones. I don't like Macs. I used them early on in school when that was the thing back in the 80s. But ever since then, just absolutely hated them. I'm a PC guy. I'm an Android guy. Okay. So now that we've disclosed which side of the fence I'm on, I want to talk about the iPhone, okay? Because initially phones, obviously had keypads on them, right? You had to dial 0 through 9, you had to put numbers on them, right? Your star, your pound. But then you had some where they slid open and they had the keypad. So because texting, you want to make it easier than just hitting 5 2 or 3 times for a letter. So you had the slide out keypad. And then you had things like the Trio, which I had and I loved, right? A Windows CE device. You had RDP on it. I could remote into servers from my phone, and I had the keypad, right? And then what did Apple do? What did the iPhone do? Oh my God, came out, right? Square thing, no keypad, one button. Everyone's like, what the hell? He had this auditorium full of people. Steve Jobs showed people the iPhone. Everyone went nuts. No one could believe it because there was no keyboard, which at the time, no one thought about putting a keyboard on the screen. And sure, you've got your volume controls on the side and your power, but on the front, on the visual side of things, there was just that one button. Now today, the iPhone has no buttons on it, okay? It's just a flat slate. And guess what? Look at all your Androids. They finally took the hint. All your Androids, there's nothing on them either, okay? They finally realized you gotta minimize. Minimization is everything, okay? So then let's go to the iPad. Now, before the iPad came out, you had Windows CE devices. That Windows CE was the lightweight operating system, was kind of burnt onto a chip. And you had these little small devices that had keyboards on them, a small screen. And then there was one device, I had it, it was called a Cleo. And it kind of looked like a laptop. It was real light and real thin. It was cool at the time. And you opened it up and it flipped up, right? I remember it flipped up and you could flip it back and make it almost like an iPad to where it's just a touch screen, but then you flipped it up and it was kind of like a laptop. And it had a full keyboard, monochrome. It was really not a computer. It was, you had Wi-Fi connectivity or you plugged into a LAN and you kind of ran things off the internet, okay? That was the closest I think Windows got to maybe getting to the point where Steve Jobs was. But shortly after that came out, what came out? The iPad, right? This flat screen. No keypad on it, right? It was just a flat screen, and when you needed the keypad to come up, it came up. You can just touch the screen and do everything, okay? Now you've got the iPads where, they understand you do need a keypad there, without taking up screen real estate. So you've got the fold up cases, they've got the keyboard as well. But that iPad, I mean, think about it. If you go back to the science fiction movies back in 70s, 80s, whenever, and you saw that there was always this screen, this touchpad, that's where Steve got the idea. He was just able to implement it and see how to get around this whole keyboard limitation. So his whole concept was to minimize, right? He didn't like buttons. He liked a flat screen. I'm sure some of you guys like watching the SpaceX launches. I love watching those launches. What's different than what maybe happened in the 60s when we were sending rockets into outer space and eventually to the moon, right? Look at those capsules. Look at those rockets we had. All the buttons and all the lights and all the dials everywhere, right? And the technology, the brain power on that was, you know, pretty much what's on a smartwatch, or even really probably just a Casio watch for argument's sake. So you had all those buttons, all those controls, and what's in SpaceX? A couple touch screens. That's it. It's all touch screens. Okay, even in the space shuttle, okay, there was the joystick, there was buttons, switches, dials, gauges, and SpaceX touchscreen. Everything's a touchscreen. So I say this because when you look inside your Tesla, and I can show you pictures here of inside of Teslas, literally all the Teslas inside look the same, right? You go and sit inside a Corvette, the new Corvettes, fast as anything. They have the hybrid EV and motor, 0 to 60 in 2.5. Yeah, they're fast, okay? They better be for 100 grand. But look at all the knobs and buttons everywhere, aside from the steering wheel, which is overloaded with buttons. Next to the steering wheel, you've got buttons. Over here by the arm piece in the middle, you've got buttons and dials. And then you've got your gauges over there. And then I think overhead, there's even a couple buttons. The only thing in the Teslas that you have outside of the screen, which the only reason why they have it is because it's required by NHTSA, is your hazard button and your drive, reverse, neutral, that's it. Buttons to change your gears, okay? And we often forget that they're, I forgot they were there when I got stuck in the sand. I forgot that's where I had to go for my neutral. You're not used to those buttons, right? Even on your armrest by your door, you've got your controls for your windows, right? But there's no lock there, it's just controls for your windows and your button to hit to open the door, okay? Everything else is on that screen, and yes, on your yoke or on your steering wheel, you've got your directionals, you've got your windshield wiper, your high beams, your voice control, and then if you have some of the Tesla cars, you've got your stalk for directional, or you've got your stalk for changing gears, okay? And that stalk, again, NHTSA requirement. A lot of the new Teslas now on the touch screen, again, upper left side of the screen, you move it up or down or put it in the middle of the park. Okay, totally doing away with buttons and controls and everything else. They want everything on the one screen and make it a touch screen. Look at the new Cybercab, okay? Again, just a touch screen, no steering wheel, no pedals, a button for the door. I don't even know if the windows roll down, okay? We haven't really gotten the details on that. But again, that is the concept of Tesla. They took a total page from Steve Jobs with that whole minimalization, the whole keeping things simple, okay? And even Elon, he likes sporting his Occupy Mars or SpaceX shirts, but it's just t-shirt and jeans. Don't throw in a jacket if he's in the White House, right? But it's keeping things minimal. That's Steve Jobs' influence. And again, it's not really just with Tesla. It went over into SpaceX. If you look at every piece of technology now, that's really a successful hit. It's evolved in everything, okay? And so Steve Jobs is always with us, that whole concept that he introduced. And we saw it so slow that we didn't see it. And that's the beauty of it. We didn't see how slowly he changed the PC and the mouse and the iPod iPod and the iPad, but when that iPhone came out and he took that keyboard off, man, that day right there in technology was, everything changed. And now today, everything has gone that route. Everything is as simple as possible. Look at like the Alexa thermostats, if you've got one of those. It's, you know, even the Nest, not so much because it's got the dial, but the Alexa, it's two buttons, but it's not really a button, and you touch it, but it's a flat surface. It only comes on when you adjust it. All these other devices trying to keep things as minimal. Fewer buttons, fewer dials, fewer lights and distractions, okay? That's kind of my rant for today, but it's not really a rant. It's just to open your eyes as to what influence Steve Jobs' Apple had on Tesla, on SpaceX, and I'm sure in other aspects of Elon's technology. So I just want to kind of shed some light on that, because I think there is an art to technology, and there should be an art to technology, because honestly, ones and zeros get kind of boring and monotonous, and sometimes we just sit back and appreciate the beauty, and that's where Steve's influence really is going to make the world future, I think, a beautiful place. If you think, again, I'm going to close up with this. Look at some of the older sci-fi movies, how the future, everything was more simple, right? People, whether it be their uniform was one color, or everything outside or inside even was just very kind of plain and minimalistic. Maybe in the future we don't have art hanging on the walls. Maybe we've got pads or, you know, kind of monitors, and we can change the art out by hitting a button or programming it on something. So that's my thought for the day. Maybe you can hit a button and change the paint color on the walls just because you're in the mood for a different color. Who knows what the technology in the future will bring, but whatever it does, it'll be influenced by Steve Jobs, just like he influenced our cars, our truck, and everything else that we do today. So, thank you for letting me espouse a bit on this somewhat tangent subject, but I do appreciate you being here. And again, please tell others about this channel. We're really trying to grow it to the next level. As always, what do I want you to do? Like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you again tomorrow.